My name is Julia Holloway. I'm 17 years old. I found a DNA test in my mother's underwear drawer the week before spring break. I wasn't snooping. I was looking for her passport because my school needed it for a permission packet, and she was at work, and I knew she kept important things in her bedroom because my mother never trusted drawers that didn't lock or people who asked too many questions. The passport wasn't in the top drawer. What I found instead was a large manila envelope folded in half and shoved behind a stack of old bras she never wore anymore, like whatever was inside needed fabric and darkness to stay buried. I almost put it back. It looked like paperwork, insurance maybe, something medical, something boring. Then I saw my little brother's name written across the front in black ink. Evan Holloway. Date of birth 2016. Evan was 8. I was 17. I opened it because I couldn't think of any normal reason an 8-year-old boy would need a DNA test. The first page was numbers and charts and language that felt designed to keep ordinary people at a distance. The second page was worse because it was plain enough to understand. Alleged father, Dean Holloway. Relationship to child. Biological father. Probability of paternity. 99.97%. Dean Holloway. My uncle. My father's older brother. I sat down on my mother's bedroom floor so fast my knees hit the hardwood harder than I felt. For a long time, I just stared at the page. No tears, no shaking, no dramatic collapse. Just emptiness. A hard, echoing kind of emptiness, like someone had opened my chest, removed something vital, and left the space behind untouched and freezing. My brother was not just my brother. He was my cousin, too. My mother had a baby with my father's brother. And in that moment, every single story I had been told about why my father left stopped making sense. Evan was born in August of 2016. That meant he was conceived sometime around November of 2015. My father left in March of 2016, 5 months before Evan was born. All my life, my mother had told me the same version of the story. Your father couldn't handle being a husband, couldn't handle the pressure, couldn't handle responsibility. Some people just aren't built to stay, Julia. She said it with that sad, practiced calm she used whenever she wanted pain to sound noble. Like she was the one left standing in the wreckage while he selfishly drove away toward freedom. I was 7 when he left, old enough to remember him, old enough to remember his hands, always rough from work, always warm anyway, old enough to remember him kneeling behind me in the driveway while I wobbled on a bicycle, saying, "Keep your eyes forward, Jules. The bike goes where you look." Old enough to remember the sound of his voice when he read to me at night, even when I was technically too old to be read to. Old enough to remember that he had never once felt like the kind of man who would leave for no reason. And suddenly I understood that he hadn't. He left because his wife was pregnant with his brother's child. I read that sentence again and again until the words stopped looking like English. Then I folded the papers exactly the way I had found them, put them back into the envelope, slid the envelope behind the bras, found the passport in the second drawer, went to school, sat through 3 classes and heard nothing. My chemistry teacher called on me once, and I stood there with my notebook open and no idea what chapter we were in. The room laughed softly, not cruelly, but enough to make me sit down fast. I spent the rest of the day staring at the clock and thinking about my family as if it belonged to someone else. You need to understand what that test meant. My father's name is Russell Holloway. He was a plumber, not the polished TV kind. Real plumber. Early mornings. Steel-toed boots by the door. A white work van with his name on the side. 6-day weeks. Calloused hands. Quiet presence. He coached my softball team when I was 6, even though half the girls couldn't hit and the other half cried when they struck out. He built a treehouse in our backyard one summer mostly by himself because that's the kind of man he was. He didn't talk about love all the time. He built it, nailed it together, left proof of it standing. He was not loud, but he was steady. And steady feels different when you grow up and realize how rare it is. My mother, Charlene, is the opposite of steady. She is magnetic when she wants to be. Funny. Social. The kind of woman who can walk into a room and make strangers feel like old friends in under 10 minutes. But underneath that, there's something else. Control. A current running under every conversation. She decides what story gets told. She decides what version of events survives. At dinner, she filled silence before anyone else could use it. She corrected small details no one else cared about. She smiled while steering people where she wanted them to go. When I was younger, I thought that meant she was strong. By 17, I was starting to understand that strength and control are not always the same thing. Dean is my father's older brother, 2 years older. Same dark hair, same height, same shoulders. But Russell wore his life like work boots. Dean wore his like a suit he'd had tailored. Sharper smile, better clothes, better car, better job. He worked management at a logistics company and somehow always looked like he had just stepped out of a meeting where other people had agreed he was important. Dean had been married to a woman named Laura for 11 years. They divorced in 2014. Year before Evan was conceived. I don't believe in coincidence that much anymore. After my dad left, Dean started showing up more often. My mother said he was helping. Family stepping up. He drove me to practice when she was busy, carried groceries inside, fixed little things around the house, stayed for dinner, then started staying later, then started showing up so often I stopped noticing how strange it was that my father's brother seemed to know exactly where the good pans were and which kitchen drawer held the bottle opener. When Evan was born, Dean was there 3 or 4 nights a week. I was 7. I thought he was being a good uncle. That's the tragedy of being a child. You think adult lies are furniture. You build your whole life around them because they're always there. After finding the DNA test, I started replaying scenes I hadn't examined in years. Dean holding Evan in the hospital photos like he'd done it before. Dean knowing exactly how to calm him down when he cried. Dean changing diapers without being asked. Dean remembering every single tiny thing Evan liked. His favorite dinosaur. His favorite cereal. Which sneakers were too tight before Evan even complained. With me, Dean had always been decent. Friendly. Surface level. How's school? You still playing varsity? Need anything for your birthday? But with Evan, it was deeper than that. Softer. Automatic. He sat on the floor and built block towers with him for an hour without once checking his phone. He knew how to speak to him when he was sick. He looked at him the way fathers look at sons when they think no one is paying attention. Once you see it, you cannot unsee it. And then there was my mother. 3 nights after I found the test, I stood in the hallway outside the kitchen and watched her stir sauce on the stove while Dean leaned against the counter drinking something over ice. She said something too low for me to hear. He laughed. Then his hand brushed the small of her back. 2 seconds, maybe less. Quick, familiar, thoughtless. That was the part that made my stomach turn. Not the touch itself. Her reaction. Nothing. No flinch, no surprise, no space created. She accepted it like a language they had been speaking for years. I went upstairs and shut my bedroom door and sat on the edge of my bed until the house blurred. I didn't confront her. Not yet. I wanted to. But anger is loud, and loud gives people time to prepare. But anger is loud, and loud gives people time to prepare. So I stayed quiet. I watched. And then I started searching. My mother kept her phone locked. But my mother believed in patterns because she liked being the one who understood them. Her passcode was my birthday. I waited until Thursday night when she was in the shower and had music playing loud enough to rattle the bathroom door. Then I took her phone off the charger and opened her messages. Dean's thread was long. Too long. Most of it looked harmless, if you didn't know what you were seeing. Can you pick Evan up at 4? He needs sneakers. Don't forget parent conference Friday. Can you grab milk? It read like co-parenting. Because that's what it was. Except officially, Dean was not co-parenting anything. Officially, he was a helpful uncle. I scrolled up farther. Months. Then years. My thumb went numb before my brain did. And then I found the message. Dean, she's starting to look like me. We need to talk about what happens when people notice. My mother, nobody's going to notice. She looks like a Holloway. They all do. Dean, Russell noticed. My mother, that was different. Dean, was it? I took screenshots. 23 in total. Saved them into a hidden folder on my phone labeled AP Chemistry Notes. Then I opened her email. There was a folder marked 2016. Most of it was bills, school reminders, medical confirmations. Buried in the middle was an email from my father dated March 3rd, 2016. Subject line, I know. My hand actually trembled that time. I opened it, and my father's voice came off the screen so clearly I could almost hear it in the room. I know about Dean. I've known since January. I found the first test before the doctor confirmed it. I kept hoping I was wrong. I wasn't. I am not staying in this house long enough to become someone my daughter would be afraid of. Julia deserves better than that. I am taking my tools and the van. The house is yours. I will send money for Julia every month. Do not contact me. Do not have Dean contact me. And do not put my name on that baby's birth certificate. She put his name on it anyway. I read the email 4 times. The first time I felt sick. The second time I felt heat behind my eyes. The third time I felt grief so sharp it almost bent me over. The fourth time, everything inside me went still. Because by then, I knew 2 things for certain. My father had not abandoned me, And my mother had lied so completely for so long that the truth wasn't going to survive unless I dragged it into the light myself. First, though, I needed to find him. I thought finding my father would be the hard part. It wasn't. The hard part was deciding what I wanted from him once I did. An explanation? An apology? Proof that he had suffered enough to match what I had lived with? For 3 days after reading his email, I walked around with those questions sitting under my ribs like broken glass. I went to school. I came home. I answered my mother when she asked whether I had finished my homework. I listened to Evan ramble about a science project involving a volcano and red food coloring and too much glue. I watched Dean come by twice, once with groceries, once with a new pair of sneakers for Evan, and every time I saw him, something in me recoiled. Not because he looked guilty, because he didn't. He looked comfortable. That was the part that made me understand how long the lie had been alive. Guilt lives sharp in the beginning. But if you feed a lie for years, water it, protect it, let other people arrange their lives around it, eventually it stops feeling like theft and starts feeling like ownership. Dean moved through our house like a man who believed he had earned his place there, and my mother let him. I said almost nothing all week. That made her uneasy. I could tell. My mother trusted noise. She trusted reactions she could steer, tears she could answer, arguments she could overpower. Silence made her suspicious because silence meant someone else might be thinking. At dinner on Wednesday, she set down her wineglass and studied me from across the table. "You're quiet lately." I kept my eyes on my plate. Tired. From what? School. Dean smiled at me over his water like he was some harmless guest in the room. Junior year'll do that. I looked at him then. Really looked at him. At the same eyes I'd seen in Evan's face 100 times and never named correctly. At the ease in his shoulders. At the nerve it took to sit there in my father's place, speaking in that calm, almost paternal tone. I smiled back. Just enough. "Yeah," I said, "it really will." He held my gaze for half a second longer than normal. Maybe he felt something shift. Maybe not. After dinner, I went upstairs and opened my laptop. If my mother had built my life around a false story, then I was done accepting stories from her mouth. I wanted records, registries, licenses, anything that had no reason to lie to me. I started with the obvious. Russell Holloway. Search. Hundreds of results. Old addresses. Dead links. Men with the same name in states he had never lived in. Social profiles with no photos. Property records too outdated to matter. Nothing. I tried again with our hometown, then neighboring counties, then the entire state. Still nothing. At midnight, I sat back in my chair and pressed my hands over my eyes until color flashed behind them. For one stupid minute, I thought maybe my mother had been right in the ugliest possible way. Maybe he had left and disappeared because he wanted to. Maybe the email was the truth about why he went, but not about whether he ever meant to come back. Then I remembered one line. I'm taking my tools and the van. My father was not the kind of man who disappeared into air. He worked with his hands. Men like him leave a trail. I searched plumbing license databases. One state, then another, then every state within a day's drive. It took 2 more hours. When his name finally appeared, I stopped breathing. Russell Holloway, licensed master plumber, active. Fort Collins, Colorado. Business address attached. I stared at the screen until the words felt real enough to touch. Colorado. He had really gone. Not vanished. Not evaporated. Not dissolved into one of my mother's bitter little summaries. He had gone somewhere specific. Signed paperwork. Renewed licenses. Built something under his own name. I clicked the business listing. Holloway and Sons Plumbing. Sons. Plural. I said that word out loud to the empty room. Then again, sons. I was a daughter, not a son. And still the word hit me so hard I had to put one hand on the desk. Because it meant he had built that company, holding on to some version of family, even after his first one had been broken in half. Or maybe he had built it hoping, or grieving, or refusing to let the future narrow itself around what had been taken from him. Either way, the name wrecked me. The website was simple, clean, white background, blue lettering, emergency service, remodel work, residential and commercial, a phone number at the top, a photo on the About page. I clicked it, and there he was, 10 years older, broader through the chest, beard threaded with a little gray, lines around his eyes I didn't remember, one hand resting on the side of a white van with the company logo across it. Next to him stood a woman with dark hair pulled over one shoulder, smiling straight at the camera with the relaxed kind of happiness that can't be faked very well. And in front of them was a little boy, maybe 4 years old, holding a toy wrench in one fist and grinning, like he had never once been taught that love could disappear. My father had a new family, a wife, a son, a life full enough to photograph. For a few seconds, jealousy arrived so fast and hot I hated myself for it. Not because he had moved on, because someone else had gotten the healed version of him. Some little boy in Colorado had grown up with the man who taught bikes and built tree houses and read bedtime stories in a low, steady voice. Some woman I had never met stood in the life that should have included me. Then, right behind the jealousy, came something else. Relief. Immense, painful relief. He had survived. My mother hadn't destroyed him. He hadn't drunk himself into oblivion. Hadn't become the pathetic cautionary tale she always implied when she talked about him with that clipped little mixture of pity and contempt. He had built a company. He had put his real name on it. He had married someone kind-looking. He had a child who seemed loved. He had lived. That was when I cried. Not the dramatic kind. No sound. Just tears dropping off my chin while I sat alone at my desk, staring at a man who had once packed his tools into a van and driven away from the worst thing that had ever happened to him. I kept thinking about that email. I am taking my tools in the van, as if that were all he had left. And somehow it had been enough to build an entire second life. I copied the phone number from the website onto a piece of notebook paper. Then I just sat there looking at it. 12 digits, including the area code. So small, so ordinary. Such a ridiculous little bridge between the girl I had been for 10 years and the truth waiting on the other side of one call. I called. It rang 4 times, then voicemail. A professional greeting. His voice. Older. Deeper. Still his. For a second I couldn't speak. My throat closed so fast it hurt. I hung up. Then I sat there hating myself for hanging up. Then I called again before I could lose my nerve. Voicemail again. This time I left a message. My voice sounded nothing like I wanted it to. Too tight, too careful, too young. Hi, this is Julia Holloway. I swallowed. Your daughter. The silence after that felt enormous. I forced myself to keep going. I found a DNA test. I know about Dean. I know about Evan. I know why you left. I'm 17 now, and I know everything. Please call me back when you can. I ended the call and stared at the screen until it went black. Then I carried my phone with me everywhere for the next 22 minutes like it was a live wire. He called back while I was standing in the laundry room pretending to sort towels. Colorado number. My hand shook so badly I almost missed the button. Hello? Silence for half a second. Then his voice. Julia. He said it once like he was checking whether it would break. Then again. Julia. And then a third time, softer, rougher, like something had torn open inside him. I pressed my free hand over my mouth. He exhaled sharply. I didn't know if... He stopped. Tried again. Are you okay? It was such a small question. Such a father question. Not, where did you find me? Not what did she tell you? Not why now? Are you okay? And somehow that almost undid me more than anything else. I know why you left, I said. He went quiet. Not evasive, just quiet in the way people get when pain shows up exactly where they've spent years trying not to look. I'm sorry, he said finally. I'm sorry you had to find out like that. You don't have to apologize. Yes, he said, and I heard something like anger buried under control. I do. You should have heard it from me, not from paperwork hidden in a drawer. I leaned back against the dryer and closed my eyes. Mom said you just left because you didn't want a family. He made a sound then. Not quite a laugh, not quite disbelief, more like pain hitting bone. I figured that might be the story. She said some men aren't built to stay. He inhaled slowly. When he spoke again, his voice was steady, but only because he was forcing it to be. I wanted to stay. I wanted to stay more than anything. But I found out she was pregnant, and I knew the dates. Then I found the test. Then I found messages between her and Dean. By the time I confronted her, he stopped again. There are things a person can survive and still not survive well. I knew if I stayed in that house, I was going to become someone ugly, someone you didn't deserve. I slid down until I was sitting on the floor between the detergent shelf and the washing machine, knees pulled up, phone pressed tight to my ear. She put your name on Evan's birth certificate anyway. I know. You knew? I checked 2 months after he was born. His voice went flatter there, the way voices do when emotion has calcified into an old scar. I knew she would. It made things simpler for her. For her, I repeated. Yes. The laundry room suddenly felt too small for all the years in that sentence. We talked for nearly 3 hours. Not all at once in one clean, emotional line. We circled things, fell silent, came back. He asked about school, and when I told him I liked physics more than English, he laughed softly and said, "You used to take apart flashlights when you were 4, just to see how they worked." I stared at the wall. I did not. "You absolutely did, and one of the remotes, and my watch. That feels made up." "It is not made up. I found my watch in 6 pieces on the kitchen table, and you looked me dead in the face and said you were improving it." I laughed then. I couldn't help it. It startled me, the sound of it, because laughter had felt impossible all week. He laughed too, and for a second the 10 years between us flickered, thinned, turned almost transparent. He told me about Colorado, about Fort Collins, about Paloma. He met her in a hardware store. She was buying parts for a bathroom renovation and arguing with an employee who kept explaining things she already understood. He stepped in to help. She told him later she only agreed to coffee because he had the sense to answer her question instead of flirting first. They got married 2 years later. Their son's name is Theo. He is 4 years old and likes trucks, dinosaurs, and insisting on wearing rain boots when the forecast is clear. I listened to him describe this life with a strange ache spreading through me. I wanted every detail. I hated that I needed them. I hated that I didn't already know them. When he asked about Evan, his whole tone changed. Careful, gentle, like he was touching something bruised. "Does he know?" "No," I said, "not officially. He shouldn't find out the way you did." "He won't." I stared at the closed laundry room door. "But Mom needs to face this. Dean, too." My father was silent for a moment. Then, "What are you planning?" I looked down at the screenshots on my phone, the hidden folder, the email, the DNA test, the whole rotten architecture of it. "I don't know exactly," I lied. He knew I was lying. I could hear it in the way he breathed. "Julia," he said quietly, "whatever you decide, I'll back you. But be careful." "Careful of what?" "Your mother has had 10 years to build a version of reality that protects her. People who live inside a lie that long don't give it up cleanly. She will fight for the story. Dean, too. Maybe not loudly, but hard." A shiver went through me then. Not fear exactly. Recognition. Because I knew he was right. My mother did not just lie. She curated. She managed. She revised and repeated until memory itself started obeying her. Tearing that apart would not be one confrontation. It would be a collapse. And collapses never fall, only where you aim them. Before we hung up, he said my name one more time. Not dramatic. Not theatrical. Just quiet. "Julia." "Yeah?" "I never stopped loving you." After the call, I went upstairs, sat on the edge of my bed, and listened to the sounds of the house settling around me. "I know," I whispered, though until that moment, I hadn't really let myself know it. After the call, I went upstairs, sat on the edge of my bed, and listened to the sounds of the house settling around me. Cabinets downstairs. The television murmuring in the den. My mother's footsteps crossing the kitchen. Evan laughing at something on his tablet. Normal sounds. That was the strangest part. The truth had cracked open my life, and still the house kept breathing like nothing had changed. Friday night, we had family dinner. That was my mother's rule. No matter what happened during the week, Friday dinner was mandatory. She said it kept us connected. Dean was there, of course. He was there almost every Friday. By then I knew why. I came downstairs to the smell of roasted chicken and garlic potatoes. The table was set properly, cloth napkins and water glasses, and the heavy serving bowl my mother only used when she wanted a meal to feel like proof of something. Evan was talking nonstop about his volcano project. He wanted help building the base. He wanted real smoke. He wanted lava that looked violent but scientific. Dean laughed and told him they'd go to the store Saturday for supplies. My mother smiled at that, and suddenly I saw it. So clearly it made my chest tighten. The softness in her face when she looked at Dean and Evan together. The ease. The unguarded warmth. This was not a temporary arrangement she had been struggling to hold together after abandonment. This was the family she had chosen. Built. Protected. Dean at the table. Evan between us. Me off to one side like a piece of unfinished business from the life that came before. I picked up my fork. Set it back down. My pulse went strangely calm. The kind of calm that comes right before impact. I looked at my mother across the table and said, "Who is Evan's father?" Silence dropped so hard it felt like another person had entered the room. Silence didn't just fill the room. It sealed it. The kind of silence where even the air feels like it's waiting to see who breaks first. My mother's hand froze halfway to her wine glass. Dean stopped chewing. Evan looked from one face to another, confused but already alert in that instinctive way kids have when something shifts emotionally before it makes sense logically. My mother recovered first. She always did. "What kind of question is that?" she said, her voice too controlled, too even. The performance had started. "Answer it," I said. Her eyes sharpened. Russell is Evan's father, same as yours. I leaned back in my chair slightly, not aggressive, not loud. Russell left 5 months before Evan was born. That doesn't change what's on paper. Paper isn't biology. Her jaw tightened. Dean set his fork down slowly. Julia, he said, that calm, reasonable tone he used when he wanted to sound like the adult in the room. This isn't the time or place. I looked at him. No, I said. This is exactly the time, and this is exactly the place. My mother's voice sharpened. Enough! I didn't raise mine. I found the DNA test in your drawer. That was the moment everything cracked. Not loudly, not dramatically, but visibly. Her face drained of color so fast it looked like someone had pulled something out from under her skin. Dean went still. Not defensive, not angry. Still, like a man who had just realized the past had finally caught up to him in a room with no exits. Evan's voice came small and uncertain. What DNA test? My mother turned to him immediately, too fast. Nothing, baby. Go upstairs. He didn't move. That was the thing about Evan. He wasn't loud. He wasn't defiant. But he was observant. And right then, everything in the room felt wrong enough that even he knew leaving wouldn't fix it. I reached into my pocket, pulled out my phone, and unlocked it. I also found these. I opened the folder labeled AP Chemistry Notes. Scrolled once, turned the screen toward my mother. Dean's message. She's starting to look like me. We need to talk about what happens when people notice. My mother inhaled sharply, like the air had cut her on the way in. Julia, Dean started. I cut him off without looking at him. No, you don't get to redirect this. I looked back at my mother. You told me my dad left because he couldn't handle responsibility. Her lips parted, but nothing came out. You told me some men aren't built to stay. Julia, she tried again. You told me he chose freedom over us. My voice didn't rise. That was the part that made it worse. Because I wasn't reacting. I was stating. And the whole time, I continued, you knew exactly why he left. Dean stood up. Let's take this somewhere private, he said, his voice lower now, tighter. I looked at him then, really looked. You've been doing everything privately for 10 years, I said. The affair, the baby, the lies, all of it. You can handle one conversation in the open. He didn't sit back down. But he didn't move either. Caught between leaving and staying. Caught, finally, without control. Evan's voice came again, softer this time. What's happening? My mother turned on me then. Not fully, but enough. You had no right to go through my things. There it was. Deflection. Control. Shift the blame. I almost smiled. You had no right to put Russell's name on a birth certificate you knew was a lie. Her hand slammed against the table. I was protecting this family. Which one? I asked. The words landed harder than anything I'd said so far. Because there wasn't a clean answer. Dean finally sat back down. Slowly. Like his legs had given up on pretending. I scrolled again. Pulled up the email. I found this too. I didn't hand her the phone. I read it. Out loud. Not the whole thing. Just enough. I know about Dean. I've known since January. I am not staying in this house long enough to become someone my daughter wouldn't recognize. My voice stayed steady, but my hands didn't. I locked my fingers together to stop them from shaking. He left because you were pregnant with his brother's child. Evan made a small sound. Not a word. Just something breaking. My mother turned to him again, panicked now. Go upstairs. No, he said. It was the first time he'd ever said no to her in front of me, and it changed something in the room. Small, but irreversible. Dean leaned forward, elbows on the table, hands pressed together like he was holding something in. Julia, he said quietly, this isn't how he should find out. He's already finding out, I said. He's not stupid. He's just been surrounded by adults who think he is. Evan looked at me, not crying yet, just searching. Is Dean my dad? The question didn't echo. It dropped. Heavy. Final. My mother closed her eyes. Just for a second. And in that second, I saw it. Not denial. Not confusion. Fear. Because the truth had finally reached the one person she had tried hardest to keep it from. I stood up, walked around the table, knelt next to Evan. He looked smaller up close. Not physically. Emotionally. Like the ground under him had tilted and he didn't know where to stand. Hey, I said quietly, you didn't do anything wrong, okay? None of this is your fault. He nodded. Barely. Is he? He whispered again. I glanced up at my mother. She was staring at us like if she didn't move, maybe time would. This is something Mom needs to explain to you, I said. He didn't look at her. He looked at me. But you know. Yeah, I said softly. I know. He swallowed. Is that why your dad left? 2 sentences. 8 years old. And somehow he understood more in that moment than anyone had given him credit for his entire life. Yeah, I said. He pulled his sleeve over his hand and wiped his face quickly, like he didn't want anyone to see. That's sad, he said. That was it. Not anger. Not confusion. just sad. The most honest thing said in that house in 10 years. I stood up slowly, looked at my mother, then at Dean. You don't get to keep lying, I said. My mother's voice came out sharp, desperate. You're destroying this family. I shook my head. No, I said. You did that in 2015. I'm just turning the lights on. Dean leaned back in his chair, eyes closed now, like he was already somewhere else. My mother pointed at me, her hand shaking. If you keep doing this, I already have, I said. And that was the truth. Because this wasn't just dinner anymore. This was exposure, and exposure doesn't stop at one room. I turned back to Evan. I'm upstairs if you need me, I said quietly. He nodded again. I walked away from the table without waiting for permission. Up the stairs, down the hallway, into my room. And for the first time since I found the DNA test, I didn't feel hollow. I felt clear, because the lie was no longer mine to carry alone. And downstairs I could hear it. Voices rising, control slipping, truth forcing its way into every corner it had been kept out of for 10 years. The house didn't feel the same after that night. It looked the same. Same walls, same furniture, same pictures hung in careful, curated lines down the hallway like proof of a version of life my mother had spent years protecting. But something underneath it had shifted, like a structure that had been quietly cracked for years and finally admitted it couldn't hold itself together anymore. No one said it out loud, but everyone moved differently. My mother stopped narrating everything. That was the first sign. She used to fill silence like it offended her. Now she avoided it entirely, moved through the house with this tight, contained energy, like she was constantly calculating what version of herself might still survive if she said the right things in the right order. Dean didn't come back the next night, or the night after that. By Monday, his absence had turned from unusual to undeniable. Evan noticed first. Is Dean working late? He asked over breakfast, stirring cereal that had gone soggy 10 minutes earlier. My mother didn't look at him. He's busy. Busy. That word sat wrong in the air. Evan didn't push. He just nodded like he was filing it away with everything else that didn't quite make sense anymore. That afternoon, I sat in my car in the school parking lot and sent the screenshots. Not to everyone. Not all at once. Just enough. My grandmother first. My father's mother. Vera Holloway, 74, retired teacher. Lives alone in the same house where my dad and Dean grew up. I didn't text her. I drove there. She answered the door wearing a cardigan and reading glasses like she had been expecting a quiet afternoon and instead got me standing on her porch with 10 years of truth sitting behind my eyes. Julia, she said, is everything okay? No, I said, it's not. She stepped aside immediately. Of course she did. That's the kind of woman she is. I sat at her kitchen table, put my phone in front of her, opened the folder. She read every message slowly. Didn't interrupt. Didn't ask questions. Just read. When she finished, she set the phone down carefully, folded her hands, and said very quietly, I've known since 2018. For a second, I thought I had misheard her. What? She didn't look away. Dean told me. He was drunk, called me late, said Evan was his. The room felt smaller. 6 years, I said. You knew for 6 years. I told him to fix it, she said. To tell the truth. To tell Russell. He said Charlene wouldn't let him. And that stopped him? My voice sharpened. That stopped you? Her eyes filled then. Not dramatically. Not loudly. Just full. I called your mother, she said. Once. I told her to tell the truth or I would. And? She said if I told anyone, I would never see you or Evan again. The words landed harder than I expected, because I believed her. That was exactly the kind of leverage my mother understood. I was 70, my grandmother continued. I had already lost my son. I couldn't lose my grandchildren too. Silence stretched between us. Heavy. Complicated. I have hated myself for it every single day, she said. I believed that too, which somehow made it worse, because it meant this wasn't just one betrayal. It was a system, a web, people choosing silence because truth came with consequences they were too afraid to face. Where is Russell? She asked. Colorado, I said. Fort Collins. He owns a plumbing company. He's married. He has a son. Her hand moved to her mouth, not to hide emotion, to hold it in place. Good, she whispered. Good for him. But her eyes were already spilling over. I stayed for an hour. Then I left. And I didn't stop there. I sent the screenshots to my mother's sister, to one of my father's old friends, to a cousin who had grown up hearing a completely different version of why my dad disappeared. An addict. That was the word she had used. I sat in my car after sending that one and stared at the steering wheel. An addict. The man who woke up at 5 every morning. Who worked 12-hour days. Who built things with his hands and never once missed a payment or a practice or a promise. She had turned him into a cautionary story, because it was easier than telling the truth. The town didn't take long. By the end of the week, my mother's phone was ringing constantly. Not with sympathy, with questions, with confusion, with people trying to reconcile 10 years of one narrative with the sudden, undeniable presence of another. By the second week, she stopped answering most of them. That's when she came to find me. I was in the school parking lot again, after practice, sitting on the hood of my car, tying my hair back when I saw her pull in too fast, tires crunching gravel harder than necessary. She got out before the engine fully stopped, walked straight toward me. She looked different, not weaker, but exposed, like someone had peeled away the version of herself she used in public and left her standing there without it. "You need to stop this," she said. No greeting, no softness, just control trying to reassert itself. "Stop what?" I asked. "The truth." I almost laughed. "You're destroying this family." I slid off the hood slowly. "No," I said, "you did that. I'm just not covering for you anymore." Her jaw tightened. "Dean is gone," she said. That caught me off guard. Gone? He left last night, packed a bag, said he couldn't handle all of this. Of course he couldn't. He had never handled consequences. Only comfort. Only secrecy. 10 years, I said quietly. He stayed for 10 years, while it was easy. Her eyes flashed. Don't. Don't what? Say it out loud? He helped raise you. No, I said. He replaced someone you helped erase. That landed. I could see it. She stepped closer. Too close. "If you keep doing this, I will lose everything," she said, her voice dropping, tightening. "The house, my friends, my reputation." There it was. Not regret. Not apology. Loss. Her loss. "You should have thought about that," I said, "before you let me grow up believing my father didn't want me." Her hand shot out and grabbed my arm. Hard. Not enough to bruise. Enough to control. For a second, neither of us moved. Then I looked down at her hand. Slowly. She followed my gaze. And let go. We stood there in silence. Then she stepped back, got in her car, and drove away without another word. Dean left the state within a month. No goodbye. No explanation to Evan beyond one short phone call that lasted less than 5 minutes. "I'll always be around," he had said. He hasn't called since. Evan didn't cry when he told me that. He just sat on the edge of my bed, staring at his hands. "People leave a lot in this family," he said. 8 years old, and already tracking patterns he should never have needed to learn. I sat next to him. "You're not getting left," I said. He leaned into me slightly. Didn't say anything else, but he stayed. And that mattered more than anything anyone had promised him before. 3 weeks later, I drove to Colorado. 17 hours. No announcement. No permission. Just movement. The kind my father had chosen once. But this time I wasn't running. I was going toward something. I pulled up to the address from the website. White van in the driveway. Holloway and Sons. I sat there for 15 minutes. Hands on the wheel. Heart somewhere between my throat and my lungs. Because walking up to that door meant stepping into a life that had continued without me. The front door opened. A little boy ran out first. Curly hair. Toy wrench in his hand. 4 years old and completely unaware that he was about to collide with 10 years of history. A woman followed. Dark hair. Apron still on. "Shoes first," she called after him. "You're not—" She stopped. Looked at my car. Then at the man stepping out behind her. My father. He saw me immediately. Didn't hesitate. Didn't question. Just knew. He said something to her quietly. She nodded, put her hand on his shoulder, then guided the little boy back inside, giving us space without making it feel like distance. My father walked across the yard slowly, like he was afraid if he moved too fast I might disappear. I got out of the car. We stopped a few feet apart. He looked at me like he was trying to memorize something. "You're taller than I imagined," he said. I let out a breath that almost felt like a laugh. "You have a beard now," he smiled. It broke halfway through. We closed the distance at the same time. And when he hugged me, it wasn't dramatic. It wasn't cinematic. It was solid, real, like something that had always been there, even when it wasn't. He smelled like coffee and pipe cement. Exactly the same. 10 years collapsed into that moment. Not erased. Not forgiven, but bridged. He pulled back and held my face in both hands. "You found me," he said. "You weren't that hard to find," I said. "You put your real name on the van." That made him laugh. Really laugh this time. And something in my chest finally loosened. We spent the weekend together. I met Paloma. She hugged me like she had been expecting me, like my existence had never been inconvenient to her. She showed me a photo on the refrigerator. Me. School picture. 9th grade. Someone had sent it to him. He never told me who. Theo warmed up to me in under 5 minutes. "Are you my sister?" he asked. "Yeah," I said. "Cool," he said. "Want to see my room?" No hesitation. No history. Just acceptance. On Saturday, I went with my father to a job. Bathroom remodel. 6 hours of work. We didn't talk much. We didn't need to. There was a rhythm. Passed tools. Adjusted fittings. moved around each other without thinking. Something inherited, something that had been waiting. At the end of the day, we sat on the tailgate of his van, drinking water, watching the light shift. "I need you to know something," he said. I looked at him. "Leaving you was the hardest thing I've ever done," he said. "Not the affair, not the betrayal. That moment at the door, walking away from you, that was the worst part of my life." I nodded. "I know." He looked at me, surprised. "How?" I glanced at the side of the van. At the name, Holloway and Sons. "You never stopped counting me," I said. He followed my gaze, and for a second he couldn't speak. "I go back every month now. 17 hours. Every mile worth it." Paloma texts me recipes. Theo calls me every Wednesday to show me whatever he built that day. My mother is alone. Dean is gone. The story she built is falling apart piece by piece. She texted me last week. "I made mistakes, but I'm still your mother." I looked at that message for a long time. Then I replied, "Russell made no mistakes, and he's still my father. Ask yourself why he had to build a life 2,000 miles away from his daughter." She didn't respond. Evan is still here. Same house. Same room down the hall. I'm not leaving him. Not like they did. Not like everyone else. Last week, he handed me a drawing. Crayons. Printer paper. 4 stick figures. He pointed to each one. "That's you. That's me. That's Russell. That's Theo." 4 of us. Standing in a row. No Charlene. No Dean. He didn't need anyone to explain it.